Imagine waking up one morning to find that the beating heart of modern technology, the global semiconductor supply chain, had been thrown into chaos overnight. Not by an earthquake, not by a financial crash, but by a single order from Washington, D.C. The United States abruptly announced that TSMC, the world's most advanced chip maker, must halt all shipments of 7-nanometer and below semiconductors to China. It wasn't just a policy decision, it was a thunderclap. Factories paused, contracts worth billions evaporated, and suddenly the companies once seen as untouchable, TSMC in Taiwan and ASML in the Netherlands, looked fragile in ways no one had expected. The shockwave for decades, TSMC and ASML were seen as unshakable pillars of the chip world. TSMC manufactured the most advanced processors, while ASML supplied the rarest and most vital machines. Extreme ultraviolet lithography systems, each costing more than $150 million and impossible to copy. Together, they formed the sacred mountains of the semiconductor ecosystem. But when the US cut off TSMC's supply to China, the ripple effects were instant. $29 billion in chip orders were suddenly canceled. Global chip prices collapsed almost overnight, deflating like a balloon. Markets panicked as investors realized the stable semiconductor supply chain was actually built on political quicksand. While analysts and commentators rushed to mock the chip giants in crisis, something far more significant was happening quietly in the background: the rise of Chinese challengers. China's countermove. The US expected the ban to weaken China's tech sector. Instead, it may have accelerated its determination to stand alone. SMIC, China's leading foundry, began expanding production capacity. Despite restrictions, it was already experimenting with 5-nanometer technology, narrowing a gap that once seemed impossible to close. Meanwhile, Huawei, written off by many after US sanctions gutted its smartphone business, was quietly building something bigger. With its Ascend Series AI chips and networking hardware, Huawei repositioned itself not just as a survivor, but as a global competitor. Even without access to TSMC's cutting-edge chips, Chinese firms doubled down on independent R&D. The logic was simple: if you can't buy it, build it. And suddenly, what once sounded like propaganda, technological self-reliance, was becoming reality. ASML in panic. But if Chinese companies saw opportunity, ASML saw danger. The Dutch firm holds what is essentially a monopoly on EUV lithography machines, the crown jewels of chip making. Every advanced processor, from Apple's iPhones to Nvidia's AI chips, is born under the light of ASML's machines. Now that monopoly looked less like strength and more like vulnerability. With US policy choking off China, ASML's biggest growth market evaporated overnight. Its stock price slid. Its executives began softening their tone, subtly pleading for Washington to reconsider. Behind closed doors, the message was clear: the supply chain was broken, and ASML could not play kingmaker forever. TSMC's dilemma. TSMC faced an even more existential problem. On paper, the Taiwanese giant had unmatched dominance. Every major tech firm, Apple, Qualcomm, AMD, Nvidia, relied on TSMC's fabs to produce their most advanced chips. But that dominance came with a catch: overexposure to China. A huge portion of its customer base was on the mainland, where demand had fueled TSMC's meteoric rise. Now forced to cut off its biggest market, TSMC found itself caught between two superpowers. To please Washington, it had to sacrifice China, but to please shareholders, it needed growth. So TSMC began a bold new move, investing billions to build fabs in the United States, from Arizona to potentially Europe. But cracks were already forming. Expanding abroad was expensive, politically fraught, and, most importantly, slower than China's ability to adapt. Nvidia's unexpected slowdown. And then there was Nvidia. The American chip giant seemed unstoppable in the AI boom, with its GPUs powering everything from CHAT, GPT to autonomous cars. Yet when China's orders disappeared, Nvidia felt the sting immediately. Billions in potential revenue vanished. The company rushed to adjust, redesigning China-specific chips that skirted US export bans. But these weaker versions couldn't compete with its flagship products, and Chinese customers were unimpressed. At the same time, Chinese startups and research labs saw an opening. If Nvidia couldn't sell them the best, maybe it was time to develop domestic alternatives. In a twist of irony, the very policy designed to weaken China's AI future may have handed it the motivation it needed to accelerate. The bigger picture, when giants clash. This wasn't just about companies, it was about the entire global order of technology. For decades, the semiconductor industry was the model of globalization. Chips designed in California, manufactured in Taiwan, using machines from the Netherlands, with materials sourced from Japan and South Korea, then sold to customers worldwide. It was a delicate, beautifully interdependent system, but the US supply cuts shattered that model. Suddenly, every country, every company, every executive realized, depending on a single link in the chain was a liability. The old rule of when elephants fight, the grass suffers no longer applied. In this new world, the grass, the smaller companies, the overlooked markets, might actually thrive as the elephants trampled each other. After the storm. So, what happens next? ASML is racing to expand production. TSMC is diversifying into the US and Japan. Nvidia is scrambling to maintain global dominance. And Chinese firms are rising faster than most expected, fueled by necessity. The semiconductor map of the world is being redrawn in real time. Who wins? Who loses? Perhaps the real winners will be those who prepared early, diversified their markets, and refused to be cornered by politics. Or maybe the winners will be those who embrace the storm, companies like Huawei and SMIC, who turned pressure into innovation. The story of semiconductors has never just been about technology. It's about power, about who controls the future. And in this unfolding drama, one truth is clear. The age of stable supply chains is over. Every chip, every wafer, every machine is now a pawn on a global chessboard where moves are made not just in factories, but in parliaments and presidential offices. What began as a supply cut has become a test of resilience, innovation, and strategy. So the question remains, in the chip wars of the 21st century, will dominance come from holding the monopoly or from breaking free of it? Thanks for watching.